Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Legal Beagle podcast. We are ready for 2022. This is the first episode of the Legal Beagle podcast in 2022, and we are coming out of the gate strong. We have one of the best trial attorneys in California with us today, someone that I have admired and followed for a few years, which is probably going to sound like I'm a stalker because he doesn't realize that. But Mike Alder, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me. First of 2022, huh? Let's go.
Yeah. I wanted to come out with a bang, and you're it. So I heard you speak a few years back down in San Diego. This is pre-COVID, way before COVID. And some of the things you said really resonated with me. And I didn't get to talk to you after your presentation, but I have this question. How did you get to here? How did you become an attorney? How did you end up doing what you're doing? Take me through that history.
Well, it's not exciting like other people who got arrested wrongfully and suddenly wanted to change the world. I mean, I kind of fell into it when I grew up in the South in Louisiana. I kind of did what everybody did. You go to LSU, right? And I was a poli-sci major, no lawyers in the family. I didn't even know what lawyers did. And I wound up meeting a woman who was first in her class at LSU undergrad. And ultimately we got married, and she said, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to move to LA and I'm going to become an entertainment lawyer. And I mean, it's not very exciting, but I'm like, oh, law school. Okay. And ultimately went to school at LSU Law School, talked my way onto a clerkship on the Mississippi Supreme Court. Just a blessing and it was only then when I realized that I wanted to do plaintiff's work. It wasn't until I was out of law school and met one of the Mississippi Supreme Court justices, Chuck McCrae, who was a trial lawyer, and he was cool and he would tell war stories. I was like, damn, that's exciting. I want to do that.
How did you end up in California then?
So, like I said, my now ex-wife, she wanted to move to LA to become an entertainment lawyer, ultimately did. She did really well in school. I helped her get to the top of the class by being some of the lower rings. And we moved to LA. I had never been west of Houston, I don't think, until I was 22 years old, something like that.
What did you think of California when you got there?
I didn't even know. I mean, I remember we were interviewing different in now Century City, maybe even downtown, both. And we came out here, and the hotel that we got was a Residence Inn in Arcadia, thinking it was next door to Century City. And I'm like driving 50 minutes an hour to an interview. And I'm like, holy crap. Little did I know I was staying in some other city, but I've learned my lesson.
When you first got there, did you hang your own shingle or did you go work for others?
No. I with Justice McCrae's help, he pulled out the Alder Journal, which is now the AAJ Journal, and I interviewed with 9 or 10 of the big names in plaintiff's work. Back then, Larry Feldman, Tom Girardi, Jerry Ringler, Green Broylette, of course. And I think I was 0 for 8 in interviews when I interviewed with Dave Harney, and he offered me a job over lunch at the Pacific Dining Car, and I accepted. And he said, well, you don't know how much it pays. And I'm like, I'm married to a sugar mama. I'm good. I accept. And that's how I started.
So not to date you, but taking you back to personal injury work decades ago, how have you seen it change over the last few decades? Because I only got into it a decade ago. And so I hear stories from people who've done it for 20 and 30 years. And they say that it's much different now than it was back when they first started. What are some of the differences that you've seen?
Well, let me say this. I would say that how you practice the business of law, marketing, getting cases, financing, etc., has changed dramatically. But the actual practice of personal injury law has not changed very much at all. And I say that as when I was president of CALA, I would look back and I reached out to the past presidents, and either Elmer Lowe was either a past president or was somebody that kept coming up by past presidents. And Elmer Lowe wrote a personal injury guidebook in the 60s. And I found it and read it. And with a couple of upgrades for comments about female jurors, which doesn't apply, back in that time, pretty much the practice was pretty similar. I mean, the things that he said we should do are pretty relevant to what we do now.
Do you still have that?
Somewhere. I've moved 4 times since then. It's at my office now in a box between. But, like I said, other than a couple of dated outlooks on jurors and that kind of stuff, what you do, how you get money, how you present a case, how insurance companies think, pretty consistent with the guidebook and the guidelines that I've written myself. I mean, I don't know that I've ever said anything original in my life. Everybody kind of steals from everybody else, and in a good way. And you probably look at the two, and while his is much more thorough and better written, a lot of the same things are there.
All right, so that's a look back. What about a look forward? How do you see this changing over the next decade or two, if at all?
Well, there's a couple of big things, obviously, that might affect the personal injury world significantly in California. The cars, automated driving, what does that mean when a car is driving itself? Does that mean strict liability on the car owner, or does it mean you got to file a products liability case against Tesla? I mean, that's a big if. And it's hard to predict how that shakes out. I mean, I can't imagine that people who get seriously injured in a car accident are going to accept a politician saying, well, you could go sue Tesla and spend $500,000 to prove your case. Why would you need auto insurance anymore? I mean, in fact, we might even be aligned with the auto insurers on that, Why could they collect premiums if, the only people that are responsible are the car builders? The other big thing is obviously the state bar allows non-lawyers to share fees, because that has the very real potential of bringing in, venture capital money that will invest unlimited monies, and the billboards you think are up now, maybe 10 times what we see.
The Arizona Supreme Court just changed that rule here, and now non-attorneys can fee share. It's, I think, the first in the country to do it, and the plaintiff's bar here is very curious and watching that closely to see what kind of VC money comes in, because I think you're right. You'll see this. I think you're going to see what I predict here, at least, and if it happens elsewhere, is these, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of bigger firms swallowing up little firms, and because they'll have the money to do it, and then there won't be enough business for the smaller firms and the one-offs.
100%. And in fact, you talk about big firms swallowing up small firms or firms getting purchased. I've actually been considering changing the name of my law firm. I mean, my firm is AlderLaw, right? Pretty associated with me. Back when I started, it was the law offices of Michael Alder. Then I changed it to AlderLaw, thinking I was hip. Well, nobody wants to buy AlderLaw, but they do want to buy AAA++ law firm, because the goodwill, if it's not associated with an individual, can be potentially transferred. And so I see the foresight of a lot of these firms that don't call themselves the traditional law firm names. It becomes much more of a saleable product.
I haven't made a lot of mistakes over my 10 years in practice. I mean, let me back up. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I haven't made a lot of business mistakes that I say I would do over, except for that. I totally agree that where I misstepped is calling this Negretti and Associates. I don't know why I put my name on it, because at the time there was not a requirement. I had to. And I have a friend here who has a law firm that is just a generic name like what you just said. And I tell him to this day, he is primed to be purchased or to sell if he ever wants to, which is one of the legacy issues with being an attorney in the first place, especially if you're working for a smaller, you have a small firm or you're a solo, is how do you retire? How do you walk away if you haven't saved enough? Because there's nothing really to sell. And when it's your name, it's even more troubling because people want you. They want Mike Alder. They don't want, Joe Blow, the attorney that maybe works for Mike, or Mike isn't even involved anymore. They want you to be attached to it, not just your name to be attached to it.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been thinking about ways around that. It's not like if I change, let's say we change AlderLaw to the AL law firm. Let's just call it that. It's not like tomorrow everything on the pleadings is AL law firm, right? I would make sure that there would be a lot of lead time that, AL law firm, DBA, AlderLaw. And I've questioned, if people are referring me a case, they know they're referring me a case. Why does my name have to be AlderLaw if they're referring it to me? I'm just trying to figure out at this point, what's a good name? I mean, pick names. I'd love to hear what people are thinking. We're what? Badasslawyer.com? I don't know.
Well, I mean, the guy here that I was referencing, it's called Accident Law Group. The problem I have with that, I like it and I don't like calling them accidents. I call them crashes. That's one of the issues. Two, I think it pigeonholes you into the auto space as opposed to product and medical malpractice and slip and falls and dog bites and all the other areas of personal injury that could come into play. And so I think you have to be careful with that. And so if you're too generic, does it have any stickability in the marketplace? And that's the challenge. But all the big players that I see all still have a name attached to them. And so you're going to see this change. And I just don't know when. And I don't know if people are thinking the way you are, that you could do it slowly. You don't have to do it and like rip the Band-Aid off. You could do it and then slowly migrate to that over the next few years or however long you choose to take to do that. But I think it needs to happen. You're going to see it start to happen.
Well, and I think that when you say all the big players, you're talking about all the big trial lawyers. And
Correct.
The reason that it's that way is because we're all older. I mean, there's no 22-year-old, trial lawyer that's tried 150 cases. But those of us, I think, that you're talking about in LA, we all have our name in the firm, and that's just kind of how you've done it the whole time. There's a lot of big players that do lead generation, that do a lot of advertising, that aren't name related, that have a general ubiquitous name of a law firm. But again, the other thing I was going to say is you talked about what's going to happen in the future. Change is going to happen. So if you look at change as a bad thing and change always happens, you're going to be pretty damn miserable. So change is a good thing. But if you call yourself a particular type of lawyer and it changes that you need to be something else, what do you do, right? So, if you're an accident injury lawyer and suddenly all those cases are called products liability cases, even though technically we know what that is, you're kind of limiting yourself. And I do some employment trials. I do, other things as well, not as much as PI, but I wouldn't want to be a one-trick pony in the name.
You've made your mark in this profession through trial work. Do you think that a young attorney, let's say someone coming out of law school that is 22 years old, do you think there's a chance for them to try 100 cases over their career if they started today?
It's harder. You get mixed results or mixed feelings, because when I first started and I started practicing, took the bar in 1994. moved here at the end of 93 and took the bar in February. So I was listening to the people saying, well, what happened in the 80s and early 90s? And they would all complain that every case was Department 1. The only ones that went out were 5-year cases. Well, I said, well, how do you ever get a lot of trials? But they seem to get a lot of trials, right? When I opened my own practice 7 years later in 2000, my setup was to try cases. I had one case when I started, and then I would put the word out. We can talk about how we do that because I think it's stuff that I tell a lot of young lawyers. But I would basically say, I'll try anything that moves, right? I had worked for 2 trial gods, in my opinion, and I've lived and breathed it. Had tried maybe, or been a part of maybe 10 or 15 trials. And I would say I'd try anything that moved. And so for the first 3 or 4 years of my practice, the average length of time that I had a case from start to the trial or finish was maybe 3 months. So I would get just all my cases were right before experts. I would take the experts and then try the case. I'd take 10 a month and I'd go to trial in 2 of them and 8 would settle. And I would try 8 to 12 cases a year. The law in California has changed. Sanchez, a case that does not allow experts to talk about reliable hearsay without underpinnings. It's hard to get involved in a case the day before trial like I used to, where nothing has been happening and I could just use my expert to take care of everything. Now, if you're not taking those Sanchez depots 6-8 months before, you're really hogtied. So the practice has changed somewhat.
Talk to me about how you approach this I'll take anything mentality to get cases in trial. Was it, I mean, did you turn anything down or did you literally take anything?
I took everything. When I started,
yeah,
I took anything that moved. I had a P.O. box in Encino, which they called them, they were basically a mailbox, et cetera, that called their P.O. boxes suites. So I was in suite 101 in a mailbox, et cetera. The building's no longer there. I mean, I was, I had income from a spouse at the time that was, allowed me to really do well, but to go out there. But no, I mean, shit, you would not believe some of the crap I tried. And I say crap respectfully in that small, all of the things that we hear constitute a bad case. I mean, there were obstacles and my job was to figure out how to get around them.
What did you learn? What did you learn from that? Like what came from that experience? Was it just experience in general or what did it teach you?
Well, taught me to think on my feet. I mean, I do this in like my talks to young lawyers and on my show. I mean, I've thrown out examples of how would you deal with this in a real life situation. And I would go through some really doozies that have happened to me in real life. And how do you get out of it? What do you do? How do you react? And the benefit of it is that you learn that the number one skill in being a good trial lawyer is heartbeat control. Because as soon as you can't control your heartbeat, as soon as you start to worry about stuff that's not right in front of you, your mind shuts down. And that's really when, the voir dire question that you were expecting to get an answer to is now the answer is suddenly different. And you're like, oh, what do I ask next? You start freaking out, or your cross-exam doesn't go the way you want, or the judge doesn't let in something in, and you start freaking out. That's more damaging than anything. And learning how to be able to control stuff. In addition to, I've written a whole book on trial guidelines, in addition to applying some pretty standard, tried and true techniques, makes you a much better trial lawyer.
So if you look back at where you started to where you sit right now, and you've amassed some of the biggest verdicts in California. And I imagine younger attorneys who you spend a lot of time cultivating, and I want to talk to you about some of the things you have in place to help younger attorneys. But you spend a lot of time giving back and educating those that want to really be good in this profession. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen. You don't just start tomorrow and hit a $40 million verdict. How do you get there? What's the process to getting there? If an attorney's watching this and they're like, what's the secret sauce, Mike? How do I do it? I'll be patient, I'll work, but what do I have to do?
I'll start with this. I remember right before before COVID, I was doing a speech on closing arguments. Right before I get up, and I wound up talking about something else. But right before I get up, somebody goes, "Oh, could you tell us also how you settle a $20 million case?" And so I start with, I just got asked how you settle a $20 million case. And so here's how you do it. The first thing you do is you get yourself a $20 million case, right? And I say that jokingly, but the problem with the listserv, the problem with stories, with war stories and whatever, is that we believe that every case is really just a function of the quality of the lawyering, and it could be easily worth 15 grand or 15 million. And in many times, while I'm not advocating that you undervalue or settle, trying to make a $250,000 case into a $4 million case is rare. And you're probably more likely to piss off a jury than for those few lawyers that have taken a case and really gotten substantially more than what generally we accept as a value. So, it's a function of experience and practice. I deal with it all the time. I mean, I get referred cases every day, and, they have expectations that sometimes are not realistic and sometimes are, but you got to govern that.
Well, all right. So let's say you get a $20 million case. You still have to ask for $20 million.
Sure.
How do you do that? How do you get comfortable with that ask, and how do you prime the jury to be willing to give you that?
I'm listening. One of the things I talk about, and you may have seen some of this stuff on my Instagram. So I talk about habits that I try to put into play every day. And, I work out 5 days a week. I read or listen to a book 20 minutes a day. But I also try to do some MCLE, legal education, 20 more minutes a day. And I've been listening to Keith Mitnick. Everybody knows Keith Mitnick, right? And he's just talking about that. Like, how do you get certain amounts of money? And his big point, which I think is an excellent point, is it starts with the lawyer believing that the damages are worth the kind of money that you're asking a jury to talk about, right? And, individual jurors may not be as smart as other people, right? They're not a rocket scientist, right? Hell, we're not rocket scientists either, but you have different levels. But collectively, a jury, I believe, is pretty damn intelligent, right? And certainly there's been one-offs where I've won cases that I was like, thank you. And cases that I've lost where I was like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, right? But for the most part, I feel like jurors tend to get it right. And they very perceptively pick up if you don't believe what you're saying. But that doesn't mean you have to do something in particular. It's just really broadening your mind and putting yourself in your client's position and not buying into the defense bullshit that's out there about a gap in treatment. And again, I'm repeating what Keith is talking about, but he's like, just saying a gap in treatment by definition defines it as something negative. It could very easily be reconstituted as not a gap in treatment, But as someone who's trying to be conservative and trying to get better and really hoping that they get better, but then also when you think about it in real life, for us, if you got hurt, I'm playing pickleball this morning, let's say I hurt my knee. Am I going to the doctor tomorrow? No, I'm going to see if in 2 weeks from now it's still hurting me, or a month from now. And probably when I should go to the doctor a month from now, probably won't. And most people are like that. But if you buy into, well, there's a gap in cover, they didn't go to a doctor for 3 weeks. Well, shit, nobody, most people don't, right? But once you have that paradigm shift, then it becomes more easy to really buy into this case has more value. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. You started this YouTube channel back in the beginning of mid 2020. I think August was the launch date of Alder Talk Live. I watched a few of these, and there's something I want to talk about, but I want to know why you started it. Can you tell me why you launched Alder Talk Live?
Well, as we had talked about, I've spent my whole career, even when I was a young lawyer, trying to talk to other young lawyers, trying to talk to law students, and my dad was a minister and a teacher, and I realized that I picked up stuff from him that I didn't think I did until I realized it as I got older. But a Pentecostal minister in South Louisiana, but was like a true believer. We're not talking about the Swaggarts and the Righteous Gemstone type of evangelical, like somebody who really was a man of God. He would always talk about helping people. He's like, you are here to help people, and you will never be disappointed with helping people. And in fact, if you give and give and give, and you do it unconditionally, and you don't ask for anything back, and thus you don't expect to get something back, you won't be disappointed when those people take advantage of you. You'll just keep giving and helping. And it really made sense to me. And it was kind of something I even put into a motto of the firm. I'm like, I've had 2 mottos in my firm: give unconditionally, don't ever ask for anything back, you will get back 1,000-fold. And in victory, be humble, and in defeat, be gracious. And just those 2 things, and I know they sound kind of, Pollyannic, but I believe it. And I tried to do it. So I say that because I have gotten to be known as somebody that can help you with depots and anything. And so young lawyers would call me a lot. And then when COVID started, I was getting call after call after call. And I decided at some point, instead of answering the same question 50 times, how about I answer it once with 50 of us on Zoom? And that's really how kind of Alder Talk Live started.
It's a great platform for a variety of reasons. And for those of you that haven't heard about it, go to YouTube, put in Alder Talk Live, ALDER, and watch the first episode, which is, the intro is only like a minute and a half, but you say something that I wrote down, and I wanted to ask about this. You talk about the highs and the lows, and the wins and the losses. Why do you think? Because there aren't a lot of attorneys, Mike, that are accomplished like yourself, that are willing to talk about the losses or the lows. Why are you not bashful when it comes to that? You talk about it on your social media. You talk about it freely when you present. Why are you not afraid to talk about that stuff that some would shy away from? They want to talk about the wins and all the highs.
Because if you don't talk about it, then you are ignoring what happens to every one of us every day for the rest of our lives. And if you only talk about when you win and you don't talk about when you fail, you are leaving out a major, major part of your life. And I have learned that motivation and executing day after day is not about keeping winning. It's way more about understanding what a failure is and how you define it as not an identity, but just as an event that happens. And so by talking about wins, but also talking about losses and failures, you're acknowledging reality, right? But two, if you don't talk about it and really learn to understand what it is and what it isn't, then you get so terrified. And when you lose, which is going to happen, you shut down, right? It's not negative to talk about failures or losses. It's actually reality. And I'm not just talking about a jury verdict. I'm talking about, well, I was going to go summarize that depot today and I didn't get to it, so I'm a failure. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, it's, as I've gotten older, I've learned that you can't cheat yourself. And if you only talk about your wins and you never focus on anything like that, other than that, what are you going to do when you don't win? Which is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean it's bound to happen. If you're not losing, you're not trying. Mike, you literally put your money where your mouth is. You have this thing called the Warrior Project that you'll fund cases for attorneys that maybe can't afford to fund their own cases. Tell our listeners a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I actually call it the Warrior Fund. And I'm glad you're talking about it because I've been trying to get people to take me up on it for maybe a dozen years now, right? Could you ask him to... Sorry, I've got work being done at my house. And
no worries.
I can hear it. So, I don't know, maybe a dozen years ago, I started something called the Warrior Fund where I started for young lawyers. Like if you've been in practice for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, you haven't tried a lot of cases. To me, trying cases and getting that experience not only is a great thing for your practice, but it really benefits your clients. And the number one reason why people, young especially, settle cases, and let's just put it out on the table, is you run out of money. I mean, right? Oh, no, it's the fair. I get it. We all have had cash flow issues where you decide that the case is worth X and you settle it. I'm not being critical. I mean, it is ubiquitous, right? But if I said, look, I'll fund up to 10 grand of your costs, I'll pay half of your costs up to 10 grand. If you say you will try this case or give it your best. If you lose, I eat it. If you settle it and you can pay me back, or you win and you can pay me back, pay me back. Done. That's it. No strings attached. And I have been preaching this for 12 years, and I think I've only had about 50 people take me up on it, maybe.
That's a big number. I thought you were going to say much less than 50.
No, but over 12 years.
I mean, I think people, I myself, when you first said that, I was like, okay, what's the hook? And I know you say there's no hook.
That's what everybody says. No, they're like, okay, what's the catch? You want me to refer your cases? I'm like, yeah, I do, but not because I'm doing this. I'm like, oh, and I would also say, and if you do, I'm available to you for advice, for help. If you want to talk to me about stuff, I'm happy to do it. And the first thing is, okay, what do you want from me? And I'm like, I get it. I understand that I get it, but I really don't want anything from you. And I get plenty back. I mean, I got to tell you, giving for me is a gift to me. I mean, I think it's a real blessing in my life and my family's life. Not because we're some great thing. I'll tell you, I get so much pleasure from helping other people. And it's, again, I don't know where I got. Maybe it's from my parents. Maybe just I've seen the benefit of good karma.
I was inspired to do something because of you, and never even talked to you about this. But back when you presented, this is going back a few years before COVID in San Diego, you gave us all this, not a book, but kind of like a pamphlet you'd put together. And it was like these tips and tricks to practicing in California, little things that you wouldn't think of about asking questions in a deposition. And so I was so inspired by it that I went back to Arizona because I'm licensed in both jurisdictions. And I was like, we don't have something like that here. And so I poured through the listserv over the period of maybe 18 months and compiled as much information as I could. I interviewed other attorneys and and then have my own knowledge. And I put together something similar, and I just shared it with the Arizona listserv.
I'd love to see it. That's cool.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. And I think I expected something back in terms of like positive affirmation. And I realized at that point, it's not why you did it. And that's not why I should be doing it. And when I let go of that, I don't know how far it's reached. I don't know where it's gone. I don't know how many people actually, spend time with it. I still have the copy you gave me, and I still refer back to it from time to time. It's funny to think about how things can be, seem small to one person, but huge to another. And that's an example of that.
I actually have those here. I have what you're talking about. So you're talking about this.
That's it.
Yeah. And so I just want to, before I talk about this, let me say something. You used the word, I really should think of it differently, right? And, as I've gotten older and I'm, I'm 54, hell, when I started practicing, I was 20 something young. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about failure and about recovery and success and being grateful about stuff. And I say that because I've learned that language is really important to how we think, and how we think tells us how we act. And so when we say we should do this, you're not really owning it, right? And I'm not being critical at all. I mean, everybody, including me, does it all the time. But instead, saying I'm doing it for these reasons and owning that doesn't necessarily mean you have to give unconditionally. You don't, right? It just works for me. It doesn't have to work for anybody else. And one's not right or wrong. It's just I have found that doing it unconditionally, it's like when you give money to somebody, a homeless guy on the side of the street, some people don't at all because they go, well, he's just going to go buy drugs or alcohol. And I say, I understand that, but I'd rather have 2 people go buy booze and alcohol and the other 8 out of the 10 go buy food, or 6 out of. And I'm willing to be taken advantage of because I don't have any expectations of what is coming back. And for me, it just makes it easier for me to do it over and over and over and over again. But this is really kind of that same thing. And so the guidebook is really a compendium of a bunch of articles that I wrote. And then once I got all these articles, I put them in a pretty book, right? But when I first started having a booth at Cala, I had sponsored the last party at the big Vegas convention. This was, 12, 13 years ago. I had one trial lawyer of the year. I was trying to get my name out there. People who knew of me but didn't know what I looked like. People knew what I looked like, but they had no idea what my name was. And I had an opportunity to get a booth at Cala. And really I did, and just put my picture and my name, and I was kissing babies and shaking hands for, all. And it's funny, my competitors, the first day they're like, dude, this is the cheesiest thing I've ever seen, right? I'm like, whatever. Second day they're like, hey, is this working? Third day they're like, how much did this cost you? And I did it for 2 years where there was no other law firm. Year 3, Greenberg left, Spanish, Girardi, Jordan, right? And again, I say that because when you have a booth, somehow I was told you got to give shit away, right? And one of the things I would give away was I wrote an article on opening statement and I printed it fancy and I would give that article away. Next year, I wrote another article on something else. Next year, I wrote another article on something else. And I noticed over the years, people would come to the booth and go, you got another article this year? And so at some point, I had enough to put it together in a book. And then, instead of just litigation articles, there was life articles. There was success articles. There's an article about how you organize your finances in your firm. And so I would just give it out. And then people would be like, dude, I keep this on my desk all the time. Your article about the 8 cases that you need to know to be a good trial lawyer, I cite it all the time. That makes me really happy. It has also been a great business generator, right? It has come back 1,000-fold. But whether you believe it or not, it's not really relevant to me. But I would do that whether I got no business from it, because it is good shit, because it's hard knocks learned over 30 years. But the other thing I just did in COVID, which is a thing called the guidelines, was in that Alder Talk Live, I would tell people on there about litigation strategies that I used in my firm. And I had written down over the years strategies that I would only give proprietarily to the lawyers in my firm that we would deal with. How you deal with a 998, and what happens if they do this, you do this. And if this happens, do this. And I would tell people about it so much that I'm like, well, why don't I just give it to everybody? And if you're going to give it away, at least put my name on it. And so I give this away all the time. And if anybody wants one, I don't know if you have my email on your podcast at some point, but I'm happy to send it. It's no charge. It's no big deal.
So they just email you and you'll send them a copy of each?
Oh, yeah.
I need the guidelines. I have the guidebook, but I need the guidelines. So
I'll send you the guidelines. It's pretty good stuff. I mean, there's some stuff and then we follow it really, like, for example, you make a policy demand or a 998 demand, that's the policy or within the policy. If they don't pay the policy, we have with rare exception, we demand well over the policy. Not crazy, but because doing that conveys to the insurance company so much about what you believe in your case. And even if the case winds up settling at mediation for the policy or under, your first 3 or 4 moves are over the policy. And a case that might have settled for $600,000 settles for $750,000 just because you made these types of strategic decisions. So when they come to mediation, they're no longer thinking policy or below. They're like, let's try to get this under the policy. It's a different mindset. And really all you've done is you've made sure that after a policy demand has not been paid, you go over it. And there's a lot of different things like that in there, that how an insurance company thinks. And we could talk about that for days, that really govern how we litigate our cases.
They're simple concepts. I remember hearing you say this, and I actually still use this example with clients. When they can't wrap their head around the legal standard of preponderance of the evidence, I say, I'm going to tell you something I heard, and this is from Mike Alder, and it's this. If you believe us more than you believe them, we win.
Yep.
Mike, that is the simplest thing I've ever heard anyone say. And if you stop and pause, you're like, okay, I get it. You can tell non-attorneys that and they get it. I mean, clients hear it and they're like, that makes sense. That's it. That's the 51% and the scales of justice and all this shit that we try to explain to people. It's simple.
The other way I've done it in other language, and it resonates with different people, so maybe you want to use both of them. Like, what do you think probably happened?
How simple is that?
Who's probably right?
Yeah.
You think we're probably right. And it's important in closing, I think, that sometimes you do have to emphasize that because it's, do you believe us or you believe them, that doesn't mean that you have to believe 100% of us and 0 of them. You just have to believe more of us than them. So they could win 49 points. If we win 51 of them, 51 more, we win. You don't have to disprove. The defense makes some good points, ladies and gentlemen, right? They legitimately have pointed out X, Y, and you should consider that. But when you consider all the evidence, that doesn't bring it that you should believe them more than you should believe us. So we should win. And again, I have found in closings and in arguing, different things resonate with different people. People learn differently, right? They learn through hearing or seeing or video. So sometimes you got to say the same thing a couple of different ways. and it means something different, and it's more effective to some people than others.
I could talk to you all day about this stuff, but I know your time is valuable. I end every podcast the same. I have what I call the fast five. 5 totally off the wall questions for you. Are you ready? I mean, you could just they could just close your computer. No. First question. What's your favorite workout?
The one I'm doing at the time, and my workout changes as soon as I finish one. I go to a different one. So I don't know if that answered it.
You never repeat the same workout?
No, I have, but I like doing a routine that maybe is a 4-week workout, and then I do a totally different one that I buy off the internet or something like that.
I saw you. I was at Cala this past year, and it was early. It was like, I don't know, Saturday morning, whatever, in the gym. It was early. You were there. You were like banging weight at 7. I was like, man, this guy is just fired up. Like, I was impressed because those nights can go long at Cala. It was really impressive to see you like up working out hard in the morning.
No, and I was pissed because they didn't open until 7.
Right. I had to wait.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we talk about. Habits really are the best way to enforce behavior that you want to do over time, but it also mentally organizes your day. And me getting up every morning at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, working out before I really even let myself get into emails and whatever, is a habit now, and it's allowed me to get that done over time, over and over, without my mind coming in and convincing me that there's something more important for me to do.
I would encourage our listeners to follow you on Instagram because you talk a lot about this stuff, about the habits. And this is not for attorneys. At least I don't perceive it to be. It's not like you're giving lessons in how to try a case. This is just about life, and it's just good stuff that we can all benefit from. So I love the posts, the videos. It's always like when I'm not feeling like I can do something, I watch yours. I'm like, I can do it. I can do it. You're right.
Well, that's the point. You just hear it over and over. Repetition is, critical because you don't hear it 8 times, and on the 9th time you do.
Right. Second question: what food do you miss most from being down south? And by south, I mean from the south, not like Mexico, because a lot of people from California are like, "Wait, down south is Mexico." I meant from Louisiana.
Fried chicken.
Is there any good fried chicken that you found in California?
Popeye's fried chicken is pretty damn good. I know that's
really?
a Louisiana, right? Southern fried chicken is just dynamite.
I love it. Third question: on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you know about cryptocurrency? Which I know you're going to talk about on Alder Talk Live tomorrow. Is that tomorrow that people can tune into that?
Tomorrow at 10, we're talking about crypto, NFTs, and metaverse.
How much do you personally know about it? Scale of 1 to 10.
Crypto?
Yeah.
1.
Okay. I didn't know if you were like 10 out of 10 and you were into Bitcoin before everyone realized it was something big. And
no, part of what I try to do on Alder Talk is I think about what's relevant to me. What do I want to know about? What's happened to me that I had to figure out? And then I say, well, if most people are like me, so if I'm having an issue with it, maybe we just talk about it and we've all figured it out together.
This was back in 2019 because it was before COVID. I went to a conference in Chicago. It was all insurance companies, all the big ones, State Farm, Allstate, everyone, commercial carriers, everyone. And it was about how they were starting to use blockchain in their everyday business and specifically smart contracts. I don't know how I got in because I was the only plaintiff's attorney there, which was very strange. I just thought I was spending a lot of time at that point trying to understand the technology and the ideas behind blockchain. And so I went and learned so much about this, where we're headed. And so when you say things like crypto and the metaverse and NFTs, I'm down that path quite a way. I'm trying to understand like how it's going to come into the legal landscape and how that intersection is going to happen.
Everything that you ever do in your life, you had a first step at everything we ever did. My 15-day-old son is going to step at one point, his first step, right? The same with learning about these things that in maybe 5 years from now, we're like, who doesn't know that shit? You got to start somewhere. So tomorrow is where a bunch of us are going to start. And then you build on that.
I love it. Mike, because you are thoughtful and what I consider to be a deep thinker, if you could change one thing about humanity right now, what would it be?
Ooh, our two-party system.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. Yeah. That needs to
George
go away.
Washington was right, man. He talked about the downfall of our country may be the two-party system. And, as a poli-sci major I remember I knew a ton about the Politburo, which is no longer relevant at all. Remember, I went to undergrad before the fall of the Soviet Union. But I remember the German and a lot of the different European countries had coalitions where it wasn't two parties; it was a coalition of 5 or 6 or 7. And now looking back, I'm like, boy, that just seems like it'd be a better way to govern.
Yeah, less polarization for sure. Last question. This is a stressful profession that we find ourselves in. Where do you find your zen or your happy place? How do you find that for the young attorney out there who's watching this and saying, man, I wish I had the outlook Mike has. What do you do? What kind of practice do you have on a daily basis? I know you're talking about habits. Where do you find that?
Well, let me say that stress relief should be intentional, right? It's not luck that you have non-stressful times that you can regenerate. And, our mental ability, our mental toughness, our willpower every day is like a battery on a cell phone. It winds down over time. And you plug your phone in just like you plug yourself back in to get more mental reserves. And so I've said, I write in a journal. I want to do that every day. I want to take 2 to 3 times where I spend just a minute at most, especially if I can be with my wife or a loved one or a friend. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it's not if everybody's on board. And we say, okay, let's spend 3 things that we are grateful for. It doesn't matter what it is, just come to mind. And now let's spend 20 or 30 seconds. Don't say anything. Put your feet on the ground. Don't think about the past. Don't think about the future. Just be present and feel where you are right now and think about the things you're grateful for. 20 seconds. I got to tell you, it's a game. It just changes your whole heartbeat, your life. And you do that 2 or 3 times a day, you will be amazed at the stress relief. But it's got to be intentional. And I mean that by you got to make yourself schedule it. Put the different things on your phone so it goes off and you're like, okay, I don't give a crap what's going on right now. I'm taking a minute and I'm not going to do anything but that. Try it for a week. It takes about 2 months for any good or bad habit to become entrenched. So you do it over time until it becomes a habit. It will change your life.
So I want to clarify this. I'm going to do this. It's 3 things. 3 things. You say one thing you're grateful for, and then just feel that one thing for 20 seconds.
Yeah. So I'll be like, okay, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful that the lights work. Now I'm going to put my feet on the ground, feel grounding, and I'm just going to close my eyes, and I'm not going to let myself think about past or future. Just feel where I am for 20 seconds.
Oh, it's so good.
It's great.
It's so, because it doesn't matter what you believe or where you come from or any of your affiliations. That's something everyone can wrap their mind around. And everyone can do it if they take the time to do it. I love the intent.
All done it together on Alder Talk Live. I know it sounds like kind of hippie-ish and whatever, and I'm like, just get over it, right? We're not, hippies here, but and everybody who did it was like, damn, that wasn't bad.
I love it. Mike, Alder, I so much appreciate the time. I could talk to you forever. Thank you for doing the Legal Beagle podcast. Thank you for helping us kick off 2022. Hopefully you can come back again and share some more of these wonderful insights on just not only about the practice of law, but about how to be a good human being on this planet. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.